Hello, this is Angelia, and you are listening to or watching the podcast, Why You Do What You Do. The podcast that talks about human development and psychology to help you figure that out a little bit more. Now, last time we were talking about evolutionary, sociobiological perspective, and we're going to start on ethology. Ethology is the study of the distinctive behaviors of species of animals that have adaptive or survival value. And that's based on, if they have value for us to study them. Because there were animals who adapted and survived, climate change, total destruction of their environment, and there were those who were not so lucky. So, we're trying to look at, what's the deal on that? Ethologists suggest that, for each species, certain innate behaviors have evolved to increase the odds of survival. And that can be true because we know in our life there is this thing we call common sense. You behave a certain way in the human world, and you don't get hurt or killed. Now, the animal world's a little bit different. There's predator and prey and things like that going on. And that happens in the human world too. For predators, the bad people in society who like to prey on others. Those of us who are, just regular Joes walking around are prey. So, excuse me. It's good to study what survival instincts have helped a species to overcome. One example, studied by Conrad Lorenz, is newborn ducklings' instinct to follow their mother. Because if you notice that, sometimes duck mamas are not the best mamas. They be leading them off, big drainage ditch side jumps, trying to take them up sidewalks, having them fall down into, the sewers. Ducks are not the best mamas. But the duckling's instinct to follow their mama can keep them alive, especially if there's danger present and mamas like run or swim, that can help them. Other examples are squirrels burying of nuts in the fall and spiders spinning of webs. Because, the squirrel, he's in usually a forest area where there's winter. So he's going to have to store some food for winter or he's going to starve. And then again, the spiders specialized to spin this silk to catch other insects so they could survive. So these are specializations that certain species develop to keep them alive. Ethologists do comparative research to identify which behaviors are universal and which are specific to a particular species or are modified by culture, because there are differences. We all have that built-in fight or flight response. If you're an animal, you just do. And again, we are animals. We're not vegetable or mineral. We're considered an animal. Don't get all your panties in a bunch because I say humans are animals, because that's the fact, Jack. And there are certain things like that are specific, like spider spinning webs. It'd be weird if we did that. I don't even want to think about that. But anyway, some things are modified by the culture. There are different species of animals that develop different things based on their culture. And yes, they have a culture. They all hang out together and do certain things in certain areas. So their little groups, have a culture. They do this by observing animals, usually in their natural surroundings. Because, if you take an animal out of its natural surroundings, shove it in a laboratory, it's going to act totally different than it would if it was out in the wild doing its normal thing. You're not going to get a good, baseline for your study there. In the 1950s, the British psychologist John Bowlby applied ethological principles to human development. He saw infants' attachment to a caregiver as a behavior that evolved to promote the infant's survival. Because, if it was clinging to mama and paying a lot of attention, goo goo gaga, and then mama would like it and she would hold it closer and it would survive versus, a baby might just wander off, or, one that wasn't giving mom any feedback. She's like, this baby ain't right. I don't care about this baby. Stuff like that. Ethology is now identified with the sociobiological perspective proposed by E.O. Wilson, which focuses on biological bases of social behavior. Again, we all have social behavior, and there are people who, the lay term could be used, chameleons, who behave a certain way, and then they get in a social setting and behave a different way. But we all have social behavior when we're out in society. It looks beyond an individual's immediate behavior to its function in promoting the survival of the group or species. Okay? So there are behaviors that help you survive. This is how we come up sometimes with maladaptive habits and schemas that are not so good for us later in life. It's the thing that helped us survive. But sometimes those things don't carry over into adult life or to your life where you're not in immediate danger. And so sometimes we have to go to therapy and get those things unlearned or change those things. So, that's something there that I'm sure they think about. Because something that helped you to survive might not be something that's good for everyone. And especially if it's a negative habit or trait, that's certainly not going to be good for society. We see enough of the negative traits that have been promoted and carried out in society now, and society is not so healthy right now, Sociobiologists have studied such topics as reproductive patterns, altruism, parenting, and mating behavior. So when there's a boom, when times are good, there does seem to be a baby boom. Immediately after a war or a natural disaster, there does seem to be a baby boom. So it could be that when we feel endangered as a species, or a lot of lives might be lost, we feel the need to reproduce. And, nature might help us with that. They've done some studies on that and never really proved that that's a thing, that women are more fertile during these times. But, it's certainly, that people are caught up in the joy of life, and, more babies are being born. Altruism, giving, and being, a good, decent person, definitely does help society, because when someone treats you well, they will treat others well. And now that's not always the case. And there are people who are not giving people and they don't believe in that. They're very selfish. And that's a shame. And again, that adds to problems in society too. Parenting, if you're a good parent and you're putting the love and time and effort into your child, then you're going to raise a more well-adjusted child. If you're not parenting your child and they're just a little wild thing running around, that's going to show too. And that's a lot of the problem we have today in society. I'm not going to even get on that soapbox, but it is a problem. And mating behaviors. Usually that's for animal species. But now they have looked into mating behaviors in humans with some kind of comical results. Men think, as with, nature and competition, that the biggest, toughest, male should be the winner of the girl. And that's not always the case, because in human females, we have more folds in our brain. The males' brains are bigger because they have a bigger head. They're a bigger animal than we are. We're a smaller animal. That's just how humankind has developed it. And the theories on that is that the woman is smaller and has 3 times the connections in our corpus callosum in the middle of our brain, so that we can think on the run. That our emotions and our logic sides of the brain talk to each other. So we are smaller, we can run faster with our child in our arms and pick out, safe places that we could go, and logic and the emotion part's working too because we're trying to save our child, so as to, promote the survival of our children. And then the males are more modal. The males do not have those connections in the center of their brain. They have a third of those connections. So they're more like a stick shift. They go modal. They can go into logic or they can go into motion. And any woman can attest to that. Men like to say we're the more emotional. You get a man in an emotional mood. They're way more emotional than a woman is. But we can shift gears. Now we're more willing to cry and show emotions and things like that, but we get over it faster. But that's how we were wired for the survival of our species. But the woman doesn't have to choose the biggest, toughest male, especially, like I said, because we have more foes in our brain. We're capable of higher thinking and faster thinking. We might see the smarter male as the better survival option because we feel like this guy here is foolish. He's getting into trouble, doing dangerous things that can endanger us and our children. This guy over here is smart. He's doing smart things. He's figuring things out. He's capable of probably earning more than this guy over here, and if he's cute, that'll help too. But, sometimes we go with the biology, sometimes not. So, besides ethology, the sociobiological perspective draws on the findings of several other scientific disciplines. Again, like I said, everybody's standing on each other's work and building up, including anthropology, ecology, genetics, and evolutionary psychology. Because when you take all these things into account, if we study humans from the past, we can kind of see where we're going. We can chart the course of how we evolved to how we are now. And how our environments have changed. And what genes were passed on, like I said the other day. Poor Neanderthal man, he's gone, been long gone. But there's more of his DNA running around now than there was back when he was around. Because evidently, Neanderthal man got around. So all the other man carries some of his DNA. So evidently he must have been cute, or I don't know, back in the day. And evolutionary psychology, how we evolved as human beings, how our minds evolve, and these are important things to know, to kind of chart where we're going as a society and where you're going as an individual. Evolutionary psychology applies the Darwinian principles of natural selection and survival of the fittest to individual behavior. According to this theory, people unconsciously strive not only for personal survival, but also to perpetuate their own genetic legacy. Now, in the past, that has been true. We're now, there's now studies on the millennials, to where a lot of them prefer to be single. They don't prefer to pair up, and they don't prefer to have children. Now, so far from what I've read of the studies on this so far, is the how do you put this nicely? The bro culture in the 70s and 80s, where women were, sexual objects, and women were being assaulted and treated like less than human beings, promoted the feminine revolution that kind of started in the 60s, so that women later on in the, late 80s, 90s and on, became a little more proactive. They learned, self-defense. They were less tolerant of a man who was sexist or, any iss they didn't care for. And so therefore, men of that time kind of started copying an attitude about women or, the B word. But if that behavior hadn't come about, then their behavior wouldn't have changed. It's all relative, the domino effect's happening. So, because those children saw the divorce rate, go to a over 50% rate, and the war between the sexes, they observed that, they're now like, it's not worth it. I'm not doing it. So, that's a shame. And I heard a sociologist back in the 70s say that man had reached his peak and now is de-evolving. And from what I've seen in the world, I kind of hate to agree with that, but it seems to be a thing. The result for the species is the development of mechanisms that have evolved to solve problems. Because that's a big thing for us. As an animal, we're pretty weak. We don't have large canine teeth. We just, I kind of have, a little bit of a point there. We don't have big claws, although some women grow their nails out. So as a species, we're pretty weak, So we had to learn strategies to survive. Like if, there's debates on whether, dinosaurs were around when humans were around or whatever. But anyway, there were certainly big predators like saber-toothed tigers and things. So if we could go back in a cave and crawl into a hole they couldn't get in, or climb up a tree maybe they couldn't climb, that helped us to survive. And that's how, you learn. And then, of course, later on we developed tools and even the odds out a little bit, where if we had a spear or an arrow or, a knife, instead of the claws that we didn't have, or, long 6-inch long canines we didn't have, even the playing field a little bit. For example, there is evidence that morning sickness and sudden aversions to certain foods common during pregnancy may actually be a mechanism for protecting the fetus from toxic substances during its most vulnerable period of development. Like I said, I was sick with all mine. 8 months with the first one, 6 with the second one, 4 with the last one. I did better, but I was sick a lot all the time. I had hypermedes gravidium, I believe it's called, and just throwing up 6 times a day. Ended up taking the enamel off the back, lost some of my gum there, so bone was exposed. I got osteosclerosis there, and some of the bone has fell out over the years. It's great. It's lovely. But, in some beings, that is a severe reaction, but it's, there for a reason, because your survival instincts for your baby is to keep it safe. And if something makes you feel a little icky, you might just check it out. The hormones are evolved, and the things that are programmed into your DNA for the survival of your baby can trigger these things. And unfortunately, sometimes, like in my case, they trigger them too far, and then you're sick all the time. However, such evolved mechanisms are not as universal or automatic as the innate mechanisms found in animals. Because again, we're humans. We've developed a fake world. We live in a fake world, the man-made world. We don't live out in nature where, we're making nests and sleeping in trees, or, sleeping on animal skins in caves anymore. We build our own houses. We live in our own houses. We have our own society. We work on, computers. We drive cars. We're not living in the natural world anymore. We're long far from the natural world. In fact, if you put most of, humans out in the natural world, they're going to have a hard time surviving. And I've studied, what flowers you can eat, what roots you can eat, things like that. So I might have a little better chance than some people would, but excuse me. For most people, if we throw you out in the woods, you're going to have a hard time because you don't have those instincts anymore. And it's not built into your DNA anymore. You'll lose it. You know the old saying, if you don't use it, you lose it? Evolutionary psychology studies how biology and environment interact to produce behavior and development. So, that's what they want to know, is what part is hereditary and what part is the environment. We're back to that old argument. And how these two things will interact to produce behavior and development, because you're going to behave a certain way based on what you experience. Like I said, everything you experience influences you in some way. And then, how's that going to make you develop? Because, traumatic things that happen are going to change your outlook on life. They're going to change the way you do things. So, that's what they want to know, is how's all this stuff working out? Evolutionary development psychologists seek to identify behaviors that are adaptive at different ages. So they're trying to figure out, and again, unfortunately, there were children used in these things. If you treat this baby this way, how does he develop differently from the babies you didn't? If you do this for this toddler, how does he develop differently from these that didn't? So again, there were a lot of studies, and some of them were good and some of them were not so good. And we're not going to get into all of that. Owie. I feel like something bit me. My goodness. So now we're going to move on to, let's go ahead and put that in there from the little chart in the box here. For example, an infant needs to stay close to the mother, but for an older child, independence, exploration, and moving away is important. So, like I said, for the baby, the survival is to be near mom, and for the older child, eventually they have to leave mom. That's the theory anyway. And go out into the world and create their own life. So now we're going to move on to perspective 5, contextual. We all develop in a context. That's just your reality, your context that you're developing in. Like I said, excuse me here, I think, the guys had the door open the other day, and I think we got mosquitoes in here, and I think something just bit me. There was a little spider came or something, I don't know, but something bit me, and it hurts. According to the contextual perspective, development can be understood only in its social context. Contextualists see the individual not as a separate entity interacting with the environment, but as an inseparable part of it. Now, again, there's going to be arguments on that because, of course, as an individual, you had an individual life, and things influenced you. Now, of course, you did influence the environment as well, but it's my feeling, and again, not everybody is worried about what I think or what these other people think. But I feel like your environment has more of an effect on you than you do on it. Now, having said that, you can certainly change your environment. I know my environment growing up had a big effect on me. But as an adult, I chose to change my environment and make it be what I wanted it to be. And that was very helpful and empowering to me, and it is to, other people. If you did not like your environment, and you do not like your environment now, you can change that. That's up to you. That's your choice. Urie Brofenbrenner's Bioecological theory. And I kind of like this one. The American psychologist Urie Brofenbrenner, currently influential bioecological theory. This is all like in dark, and it's been, kind of marked. Describes the range of interacting influences that affect a developing person. Because again, everything that you experience affects you in some kind of way. Any influences on your life affects you in some kind of way. Like I said, we don't grow up in a vacuum. It's all relative. Every biological organism develops within the context of ecological systems that support or stifle its growth. So here it's said for you. Where you grow up, how you grow up can either support your growth or stifle your growth. So, people who maybe have not had such a bad childhood, can kind of come at other people who maybe had not such a great one and say, it's over, get over it. Well, that's easier said than done, because that affected everything in your life to that point. Like I said, everything's a domino effect. So, don't criticize other people. If you had it pretty good and you think they're just being, negative or whiny or whatever, it's hard to overcome an environment in which your growth has been stifled. So, have a little compassion for people, and realize if you were in the same situation, you might have even acted worse. You don't know. Just as we need to understand the ecology of the ocean or of the forest if we wish to understand the development of a fish or a tree, we need to understand the ecology of the human environment if we wish to understand how people develop. Because like I said, we don't develop in a vacuum. Everything affects us. Everything around us affects us. According to Brofenbrenner, development occurs through increasingly complex processes of interaction between a developing person and the immediate, everyday environment. Processes that are affected by more remote contexts of which the individual may not even be aware. So again, what you see every day, what you do every day, affects you in some kind of way. And that could be for the positive, and that could be for the negative. And random things that happen, like some people might have grandparents or aunts or uncles or whoever kind of come in and, help the kid, or, spend some time with the kid or whatever. So random things can even affect the way you develop. That's not a consistent day-to-day thing. Excuse me. My goodness. Yep. Excuse me. Oh, Lord have mercy. To understand these processes, we must study the multiple contexts in which they occur. And again, that's usually the home. Like talked about one study where they had gone into the home and talked to people. And of course, there's going to be a margin for error there, because not everyone's going to be honest about what's going on in the home. So again, there's margins for error. These begin with the home, classroom, workplace, and neighborhood. Because let's face it, you start out at home. That's where you grow up. That's, the first environment that you're in is in your home. That affects everything else in your life. The classroom. Unfortunately, the classroom is kind of a Lord of the Flies environment. When the teacher's right there, there's a little more control. Teacher leaves the room, we're Lord of Flies environment there. Kids are mean. Kids are crazy. They'll do whatever they feel like doing without the adult supervision. So that's the next environment where you could either be, brought up or brought down. Your workplace. That was kind of a shock to me. I thought once I got out of school, there wouldn't be any more of these like mean girls and, freaky guys that were not so good to girls. Out in the adult world. I thought the adult world, everybody would be adults. And then I went and worked with some people and found out that was not the case. There were some mean girls who were, in the workplace, and they were up in their 40s and still mean girls. And there were guys who still, was side-eyeing every girl that, was going by. And I'm like, oh, well, great. Because I thought, the adult world was going to be better, and it wasn't. So A workplace, can be also a place where you can be brought up or stifled. And your neighborhood. The neighborhood I live in when I first moved in here was a super great, nice neighborhood. A lot of older people. Everybody had flowering shrubs and trees and gardens and plants everywhere. Well, because it was an older neighborhood, and a lot of these people were about the same age, when they started passing away, their kids started using these homes as rental properties. So a whole different type, or I hate to say even class, of people started moving in who didn't care about the homes, and they were lower, these are lower priced homes, so, people had a lower income, and then we had homes that would sell and people with lower income would move in. And I'm not saying everyone with a lower income is not, taking care of their property or being a responsible, good person, but unfortunately we have more than our fair share of that here in this neighborhood. So even the neighborhood you live in can affect you. And we talked about that a little bit in one of the other podcasts, where we talked about if you grow up in a poor neighborhood with not much outlook for your future, you're going to have a worse outcome than if you grew up in a more affluent neighborhood where you're expected to, become that way, and there are more opportunities. You're going to have a better outlook on life. These begin with the home. Yeah, we did that part. Yeah. And they connect outward to societal institutions, such as educational and transportational systems, and finally encompass cultural and historical patterns that affect the family, the school, and virtually everything else in a person's life. Because, a person who's more well-adjusted is going to go out into society. They might join social clubs. They might, do things, get involved with charities and things like that. Whereas a person who's more antisocial, has not had, great experiences in society, is not going to do that, and people who went to college are around more people than people who did not. So that might also help you be a little more outgoing. And, let's see. Again, that's going to affect the way you raise a family. The way you were raised is going to affect the way you raise a family and everything that happened to you. I had to be an advocate for a couple of my children who had learning disabilities. And I was not going to let them be, left out of things or put into areas that they did not need to be in. If I had been a person with a much more negative attitude, maybe I wouldn't have bothered. Maybe I was like, oh, well, that's the way it is. But no, I was able to advocate so that, they got the best chance they possibly could have. And again, like I said, everything just affects everything. It's all related. It's all the domino effect. By highlighting the interrelated context of and influences on development, Brofenbrenner's theory provides a key to understanding the processes that underlie such diverse phenomena as academic achievement and antisocial behavior. Because this is a lot of things that school systems are, concerned about. Why is one kid, getting A's and behaving, and why is this other kid flunking out and he's clearly exhibiting antisocial behavior? And that's something that they were trying to figure out. And of course, now we pretty much know these things start in the home. If a child is encouraged to learn, they're going to like learning more. And if they are expected to learn, they're just going to take that as part of their life. And if a child is being neglected or abused and they have a bad attitude, they're having a negative outlook on the world, they don't feel like they can succeed, so it doesn't matter. They're not going to try and succeed. And when teachers and other kids kind of prod them in that direction, they're going to resist that, and they're going to exhibit some antisocial behavior. So, you know, it was important for them to look at these things. But, you know, we kind of know now that this is the case, that it is really a lot of nurture and some nature. But again, the way you come up in the home is going to affect everything else for the rest of your life. So that's where we're going to stop today. I hope that help you figure out a little bit more about why you do what you do. Until next time.